Welcome back to Fantasy Football. Yesterday, we're taking a walk down memory lane and looking at some of the best and some of the worst performances from 1997 to 2019 and having a little fun with some of the one-year wonders. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath, that's Ben. Let's take a look at the best one-year wonders of this era for fantasy. Guys that had a spike in production and then for the most part were never heard from again. A lot of Browns on this list. Derek Anderson, Josh Gordon, Gary Barnidge, and Peyton Hillis. I'll tell you about those guys coming up next. Robert Griffin III, that 2012 rookie season was amazing. He's now a backup for a reason. Nick Foles fighting for a job in Chicago. Had a great 2013 with the Eagles, though. Justin Forsett came on for Ray Rice in 2014 for the Ravens. Brandon Lloyd, a little debatable as if he's a one-year wonder or not. Heath Cummings not necessarily agreeing with that suggestion from Ben Gretsch. You could hear about that on our Fantasy Football Today podcast. And Jordan Reed, his 2015 season, we were chasing it for about 3 years. Just never was the same. 17.7 PPR points per game for Reed in that 2015 campaign. So let's talk about the Browns here. And again, Anderson, Hillis, Gordon, Barnidge. Those are four guys that had just spikes in production in a big season for each of them, and then just disappeared after that. So Dave, you had on your list Gordon and Barnidge. Tell us about those two players in particular, why they were one-year wonders.
Well, first and foremost, Josh Gordon started to show breakout signs the year before. He had 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. He had a late start. He was a supplemental pick. And then 14 touchdowns in his first 2 seasons. He's only scored 11 since. He really was just the number one receiver by default. They had an aggressive offensive coordinator you might have heard of named Kyle Shanahan. And Josh Gordon was just able to work with different quarterbacks as well and just really took off to have a big season with the Browns. Gary Barnidge had only 3 touchdowns in his first 92 games. And then he goes nuts for over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. He was the right guy in the right place at the right time for Josh McCown as his quarterback in Cleveland. And then no one really heard from him again after that because he wasn't very good. Wasn't good before, had a big year, wasn't good after.
He said this when we were talking about our ultimate fantasy draft, that Gordon, based on that 2013 season, people still were drafting him as recently as 2019, and we know that he's unfortunately dealt with suspensions. The reason why he was a one-year wonder was because the 2014 and 2015 season he was suspended for both of those years. Peyton Hillis is kind of the poster boy for one-year wonders. That 2010 season with the Browns. Fun fact, he was actually traded from Denver to Cleveland for our own Brady Quinn. He was part of the trade going from Cleveland to Denver with Peyton Hillis in exchange, and he had over 1,600 total yards and 13 touchdowns that season in 2010, 61 catches. He was out of Cleveland in 2011, out of the NFL in 2015, finishing up with the New York Giants. So that 2010 season was just absolutely magical for Peyton Hillis. Unfortunately, never able to recreate that once again. RG3 Heath is somebody that you suggested as a one-year wonder, and that 2012 season was absolutely awesome with Washington. Tell us about what happened to RG3.
Well, it was injuries, and I'll just tell you what scares me, and I came to this realization right before you asked me about RG3. If you were to show me what he did in his rookie year and what Lamar Jackson did last year, I would have been much more excited about the prospect of RG3 repeating it. He was exceptional as a passer, 65% completion percentage, but he wasn't so good in the ratio areas that he had to regress. Just a 5% touchdown rate, 8 yards per attempt. Those are numbers that, they might come down a little bit, but he could sustain that. And he didn't have to run as much as Lamar Jackson did. He looked like a surefire superstar. And then, as often happens with running quarterbacks, he got hurt. He had some confidence issues. He had some competition issues with Kirk Cousins, and things went down the drain. But, man, that rookie year, he looked like an absolute, no doubt, surefire superstar.
815 rushing yards, 27 total touchdowns, 20 passing, 3,200 yards. He was 185 yards shy of being the first guy to be 3,000 and 1,000 rushing. So yeah, Andrew Luck, RG3, that was the big debate in terms of who's going to be the best fantasy quarterback. And as we know, Andrew Luck was able to sustain a little bit longer. RG3, though, still in the NFL as the backup now to Lamar Jackson. So should Jackson go down, we could be running to pick up RG3 off the waiver wire based on how that offense goes. The 2008 season for Steve Slaton was magical as well, and Ben told you that Jonathan Taylor, he likes these young running backs, rookie guy coming out of Wisconsin for Taylor. Well, Steve Slaton was a rookie in 2008. Ben, were you hot after Steve Slaton, and how much did he disappoint you after that?
I actually wasn't. I don't think I had him that year, but he was pretty magical. 1,659 yards from scrimmage, 10 total touchdowns. Averaged over 100 yards per game as a third-round pick, and it wasn't really what any of us expected necessarily coming into that season, but it was a huge breakout season. And then I think kind of the more interesting note with Slaton is that the fact that he wasn't able to back that up in 2009 is exactly what opened the door for Arian Foster, who we talked about earlier on the show. Slaton, by midseason 2009, had really stumbled and then he gets hurt, and then Arian Foster closes 2009 with over 200 rushing yards in the final 2 games of that season and sets up Arian Foster's breakout 2010. So a really interesting period for the Texans, and it's why we love those Gary Kubiak, zone running backs to this day.
And he's going to get his hands on another great running back as the offense coordinator for the Vikings now. So Dalvin Cook coming off a strong 2019 season with Kubiak's influence. We'll see if that carries over to 2020. We're all counting on it, which is why we have Dalvin Cook as a surefire first-round pick. But yeah, Slaton to Arian Foster, that was a great 1-2 punch in terms of Slaton, getting hurt and then Foster taking over. But Slaton started in 2008, just was not able to sustain it. He was out of the NFL by 2011. So there are the top 10 one-hit wonders of the 1997 to 2019 era. But we want to spin this forward again, and we're going to look at some players who had big seasons in 2019, and could they be one-year wonders as well? So here's the list of guys that we have come up with, the 4 of us on this show. Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, a pair of Titans, coming off some strong years in 2019. You could debate, are they one-year wonders, or are they just guys that had spikes in production? Another debatable situation when you look at this type of category. Aaron Jones, Ronald Jones, Courtland Sutton, Michael Gallup, Devontae Parker. You see the wide receivers, and then the tight ends at the bottom there, Darren Waller and Tyler Higbee. So, Heath, you suggested Devontae Parker as a guy that's a potential one-hit wonder coming off a season with 72 catches, 1,202 yards, and 9 touchdowns, huge spikes in production. I share the same sentiment with you, but tell us what your concerns are with Parker going into this year.
It's both the past and the future. There's a reason. We've had a debate here recently whether it's a second-year breakout for wide receivers, a third-year breakout for wide receivers. There's been no one saying it's supposed to be the 5th-year breakout for wide receivers. That's because, generally speaking, if you're bad for the first 4 years, you're not going to be good in year 5. Parker had this resurrection, it seems. He stayed healthy. Ryan Fitzpatrick threw the ball to him, but chances are he's not going to match what he did last year, especially with all the turnover. They've got a new offensive coordinator. They've got likely a new quarterback at some time this season. And then there's the problem of 2019 itself. Before Preston Williams got hurt, he had more targets, more receptions, and more yards than Devontae Parker. This breakout may have never happened if it wasn't for the Preston Williams injury.
I think one thing that you're going to gamble on with Parker is how many games does Ryan Fitzpatrick play? If he plays 16 games and they just decide to rest Tua coming off the hip injury and not play him until 2021, then I think Parker could have another good season. Maybe not to this level, but still be very good. If Tua starts the majority of games, I think Parker's numbers will come down, factoring in Preston Williams, a guy that Ben likes, Mike Gesicki also being a little bit more involved, and a better run game. Obviously, we saw that last year struggle, especially after Kenyon Drake was traded. So all these things sort of factoring together, I think Parker's a little bit risky, but if you get him at the right price, that should still be an okay number 3 wide receiver. I just see him go too many times as a starting guy, and that's what makes me concerned about him being a one-year wonder. Dave, you're concerned about Courtland Sutton, as we saw last year. Dominated for the Broncos. 124 targets, 72 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. The second best numbers in those categories. 66 targets, 43 catches, 562 yards, and 3 touchdowns over a variety of players. But your concern about Sutton is what?
Well, they just added Jerry Jeudy, who's a heck of a receiver coming out of Alabama, and KJ Hamler, who's a speed demon that can play in the slot. They also added Melvin Gordon. They want to run the football a little bit better, and Melvin can catch the ball out of the backfield. Noah Fant's entering his second year. Suddenly, this Broncos offense is loaded. And if you look at his catch rate last year, it was 58%. But if you dig into his passes from Drew Lock, that catch rate actually falls to 54%. I'm worried that the target share won't be as big, and even if it is, the catch rate's not going to be as high. So he's going to need a lot of big plays like he had last year in order to come close to what he did in 2020. I hate to say it because he's a good receiver, but I don't think he does it.
It's going to be tough. And, we had on our NFL draft show when the Broncos drafted Jerry Jeudy, Brady Quinn said that Jeudy automatically becomes the number 1 wide receiver for the Broncos. I think it's going to take some time for that to happen, but Judy's profile, his prospect, says better than Courtland Sutton. So it will be fun to see how those two guys go head-to-head for that number one spot. Nice problem for the Broncos to have, though, to have two pretty solid wide receivers there with KJ Hamler now the third option. All right, here we go. Let's go. We're going to have a little fight right now. So, Ben, you got Tyler Higbee as a one-year wonder. We saw at the end of last season 5 games with either 100 yards or a touchdown. Worst game being 84 yards receiving. Why are you concerned about Higbee?
It's really that it was just those 5 games. I mean, those 5 games are the 5 highest reception totals for Tyler Higbee in his career. The top 4 and 6th highest receiving yardage totals in his career for his only 400-yard games. It was a tremendous stretch, but at the same time, Gerald Everett only played 4 offensive snaps in those 5 games. He missed 3. He did come back for the final 2, and Higbee still maintained that big role. There's still plenty of upside here with Higbee. It was a legitimate late-season breakout, and there's reason to expect that he could carry that over. I'm just a little bit concerned that Sean McVay is going to need to rethink kind of his whole offense after the Patriots sort of exposed that in the Super Bowl the year prior, and they stumbled a little bit last year, and they wound up with Higbee late, but I just don't know if that's what sticks going into 2020, so I'm just not sure that I can trust these 5 games carrying over into next season.
All right, Dave, as somebody who once sat in this chair used to say, look into the camera and tell Ben why he's wrong.
Look, I think one of the things that Sean McVay did last year, I know, right? One of the things that Sean McVay did last year during the season was reconfigure the offense. He did it with Tyler Higbee, who averaged over 11 targets per game in those final 5. I don't think he reaches that type of target share, but I think he's going to stay involved in this offense. He's going to play quite a bit. He was almost an every down player toward the second half of the season. And Ben, here's a stat even you'll love. He was 3rd best all season long in terms of tight ends in yards per route run. 2.6. So he's explosive down the field. They were using him on screens. When's the last time you saw a tight end get used on screens multiple times per game? I think his target share could be right around 7 or 8 per game. I think he'll be a factor in the red zone. And if that run game can't get going with Cam Akers in LA, you're going to see him really have a monster year. I'm convinced he's the 5th best tight end in fantasy.
It's something that certainly, again, we're going to see. Once you get past those first 4 guys, I'll tell you, Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, and Andrews, it's almost who do you like the best? Dave's going to take Higbee. Ben, you're going to take Evan Ingram. Heath, who's your guy? Is it still Waller?
It's still Waller.
Okay, Waller. You got Hunter Henry. You got Gronk now. Hooper, Hurst. I mean, it's just it's a fun conversation to have. It's fun to look at those rankings, and that's why we have shows like this to tell you who we like the best. If you like Higbee, you'll follow Dave. If you don't, you'll listen to Ben and take somebody else. Aaron Jones on this list, as we saw last year, 19 total touchdowns, matching Christian McCaffrey for the lead in that category. But what did the Packers do? Similar to the Broncos adding talent in the NFL draft, the Packers bring in A.J. Dillon. We see Jamal Williams still on the roster. So Jones could be in a little bit of trouble in terms of what his upside is. So while he does fall into the bust category, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a one-year wonder. I'm hoping not. But he certainly fits the bill of a guy who spiked in his production. His best numbers in the passing game came in the 4-game stretch when Devontae Adams was out. So an offense that will run the ball. Hopefully Jones is still the best of that trio, but will he be good enough to be a 1st or 2nd round pick? I think that's probably hard to say after what we saw from the Packers this offseason. All right, when we come back, we're going to tell you some of the best injury replacements of all time, guys that either benefited from a preseason injury or an in-season situation. Michael Vick, Kareem Hunt, Terrell Owens got his start when the Hall of Famer went down. We'll tell you about those guys next here on Fantasy Football Yesterday.